How should you manage compaction issues on your farm?
Well, the first thing is easy. Don't create compaction, but we don't live in an ideal world where we farm with hovercrafts. We have to drive tractors and combines out in the field. We just have to in order to get the job done. So whenever you're doing that, you're going to create some compaction. You know, the big things would be to avoid it to begin with is reducing tillage, building organic matter, and then not being out in the fields when it's too wet. I mean, they're kind of the obvious things. And then managing the air pressure in your tires, using tracks, those kind of things. All right, that all aside, hey, the job has been done. Harvest is over. Now we've got some compaction spots out in fields. What do we do to solve those issues?
The first thing you've got to do before you start addressing the compaction or anything else is do some good soil testing. And the reason why I bring this up is we run into guys all the time where you literally walk into the field and everything is hard. Not just where they drove, but the whole field is hard. It's all compacted. A lot of times the reason why is because they just don't have enough calcium overall in the soil. So they're using products like gypsum and lime to basically help loosen that soil up. So we want to find out right away, are you in good shape? Do you have enough calcium? Do you have enough sulfur in your soil? Are there enough of the big nutrients so you can get good porosity in your soil and you reduce compaction long term? The other thing is, before we are going to talk about any tillage or anything else, we want to get that soil testing done. We want to get any fertilizer applications done, get all those things out of the way, and then of course those soil amendments like lime or gypsum, get that done prior to any tillage you do.
You may be already saying, whoa, you keep talking about tillage. I'm in no-till. I don't want to do tillage. Or I'm in strip-till, so I really can't manage compaction that way. That may be the case, and you may be in some highly erodible ground where you need to get to a minimum till or no-till type situation. So there are solutions even in no-till. As Brian mentioned, getting that nutrient balance right is one of those things. The other thing could be cover crops. Now, on our farm this year, we don't have a huge amount of acres of cover crops. I'll be real upfront about that. But where we have wheat, we really like to put cover crops out following wheat harvest. So that's one thing. If I was going to be in strict no-till, I would really look hard at putting cover crops out in those fields. With the right cover crop mix, you can certainly address compaction issues just by growing another crop.
Okay, let's talk about that tillage side of things. Now, a lot of people will go out there with a ripper and they'll use a C shank that basically rolls subsoil up into topsoil sometimes. And then the other thing is they'll use a wide shank at the base. What we're typically talking about, what we prefer, is a narrow point and more of a straight shank. So we're not turning that soil. We're really not real big on that. What we are big on is lifting the soil a little bit and also cutting slices through the soil so our roots can get down deeper. We used to call this zone building. Basically, it's just deep ripping with a straight shank, narrow point, so we're not turning everything, we're not busting everything up, we're just lifting, setting it back down. But in the meantime, every 30 inches, we have cut slices out there to not only get below our first hard pan, or our man-made hard pan, but also our natural compaction layer that's typically down in that 14 to 18 inch range. So it's important before you even start this tillage or any kind of tillage in the fall to understand, where is my compaction problem at? You can do that with a penetrometer, you could do that with a spade, however you figure it out yourself. Find out where your compaction layers are at. If you find one at 6 inches, another at 12 inches, you got to make sure you're getting just below that 12-inch depth so you're running correctly. What we very often find is people are just going out there ripping, or even if they're using the right tool, they're just rolling. Oh, I gotta go, I gotta get acres done. Well, your tractor's going to use a lot more fuel and it's going to go a little slower. When you go at the right depth, you got to find out the right depth, because it doesn't do you a whole lot of good to run just above your compaction layer. You've got to get just below it. The other thing I think about quite often when we talk about deep ripping versus just, hey, let's run a straight shank, is in the spring and losing your base. In other words, we've had a lot of guys over the years that have ripped everything up, and then in the spring they get stuck because there's no base there in the ground. When you're doing this straight shank method about every 30 inches in your soil, in between, if you drive in between, you're going to find that's still relatively firm. Not super hard because the whole soil was probably lifted up a little bit, but at least it's firm so you can get there in the spring.
I really like how we started this talk about compaction though. Everybody immediately, when you think compaction, it's either cover crops or deep tillage. We started with a whole different approach, and you should too on your farm. Look at the nutrient levels in your soil. In many cases, that's where the problem begins. That because we have a nutrient imbalance, because we have too much magnesium and not enough calcium, that's one example, we end up with this propensity of the soil too compact, to get tight, to get sticky, and to stay wet in the spring. Solving that problem is the first thing. Then you can start looking at the tillage or cover crop option.
Hey, one last thing before we go. I just want to mention this because in some areas we are right in the middle of harvest. Drive in the same path all the way along. They say that most of the compaction occurs in that first pass. 70% of the compaction occurs in the very first pass. Just stay in that controlled track. Make your traffic controlled in the field. Try to drive on the same strips. Then you only have a few spots that are bad, not random spots all around the field. It'll make it much better. You can really see this now with some of these newer planting maps. Like on our farm, we've got precision planting. You can see it exactly as we're going across the field with the planter where we have to have more down pressure. You can see a track from the previous fall. If somebody decided, oh, I'm just going to randomly run across the field, we don't want that. Control your traffic. That'll really help you.
Compaction is certainly a big issue on farms across the country. So is our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?